If you're reading this, they failed. Those were the first words I saw after opening the envelope my parents' lawyers sent me exactly 2 years after my own family erased me from their lives. I remember laughing so hard I had to sit down at my kitchen table because for the first time in a very long time, something finally made sense. The envelope arrived on a gray Thursday morning in late October while I was standing barefoot in my tiny Ohio kitchen making instant coffee that tasted vaguely like cardboard. Outside my apartment window, rain slid slowly down the glass, turning the parking lot into a blur of silver reflections. I almost ignored the knock at the door because nobody visited me anymore. Nobody called either. Not for birthdays. Not for Thanksgiving. Not even after I spent 3 days in the hospital the previous winter with pneumonia. At 67 years old, silence had become the loudest part of my life. The delivery man handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope with my maiden name typed neatly across the front. Evelyn Carter. Not Mom. Not Grandma. Just Evelyn Carter. As if whoever mailed it still remembered I existed outside of being useful to somebody else. The return address made my stomach tighten immediately. Hale and Associates. Martin Hale had been my parents' attorney for over 30 years. He handled their wills, their retirement accounts, the sale of their lake cabin in Michigan after my father's stroke. I hadn't spoken to him since the day of my mother's funeral. The day my son Daniel looked me dead in the eyes and told me maybe everyone would be happier if I stopped forcing myself into their lives. I stood there for almost a full minute staring at the envelope while rain tapped softly against the windows. Then I carried it to the kitchen table, sat down beside the flickering overhead light, and carefully opened it with a butter knife. Inside was a single document, a small brass key taped to the corner, and a folded note written in my mother's unmistakable handwriting. My chest tightened before I even unfolded it. My mother always wrote in blue ink with tiny, precise letters that leaned slightly to the right. Even after chemotherapy weakened her hands, she refused to switch to typing because she said typed words felt cold. My fingers trembled as I opened the note. If you're reading this, they failed. That was all it said. One sentence. No explanation. No signature. Just those 6 words written by a woman who had barely looked at me during the final year of her life. I actually laughed, loud enough to startle myself. Not because it was funny, because suddenly every strange thing from the past 2 years rushed back into place, like puzzle pieces finally locking together. Daniel blocking my number 3 days after the funeral. My daughter-in-law Vanessa telling relatives I was emotionally unstable. The canceled Christmas invitations. The way my parents suddenly changed their wills twice in less than a year. At the time, I thought grief had poisoned everyone against me. I thought maybe I really had become difficult to love. But sitting there in my tiny apartment with rain hitting the windows and my mother's handwriting trembling in my hands, I realized something else entirely. Somebody had failed. And for the first time in 2 years, I had a feeling it wasn't me. 2 years earlier, I still believed families could survive uncomfortable conversations. That was probably my first mistake. The last time I sat in my parents' dining room, my mother served roast chicken on the expensive china she only used for holidays, even though it was the middle of March. I remember noticing how quiet the room felt despite 5 people sitting around the table. My father barely touched his food. Daniel kept checking his phone beneath the tablecloth. Vanessa smiled too often, the kind of smile people wear when they already know how a conversation is going to end. Outside, snow melted slowly along the edge of my parents' driveway, leaving patches of muddy grass under the porch light. I had driven nearly 90 miles from Columbus because my mother insisted the dinner was important. Family matters, she called it over the phone. At the time, I thought maybe she wanted us to reconnect after months of tension. I should have known better the moment Vanessa greeted me at the door like a guest instead of family. "You made it," she said brightly, kissing the air near my cheek without actually touching me. Daniel barely looked up from the kitchen counter. "Hey, Mom." Just that. No hug. No warmth. I remember carrying a peach pie into the dining room, feeling strangely embarrassed for trying too hard. The pie stayed untouched the entire night. Halfway through dinner, my mother folded her napkin carefully beside her plate and looked at me with exhausted eyes I barely recognized anymore. "Evelyn," she said softly. Maybe some distance would help everyone calm down. At first, I honestly thought she meant a short vacation. A break from the tension Vanessa had spent years slowly building between us. Small comments. Tiny exclusions. Forgotten invitations. Every conflict wrapped neatly enough to make me sound unreasonable for noticing. I laughed nervously and asked what she meant. Nobody answered immediately. That silence still visits me sometimes in the middle of the night. Daniel finally cleared his throat without meeting my eyes. Mom, Vanessa and I think things have gotten unhealthy lately. Unhealthy. The word landed harder than yelling would have. Vanessa reached for his hand like she was supporting him through something difficult. Nobody is blaming you, she said gently, which usually means blame is exactly what is happening. We just feel like there is too much emotional pressure all the time. I stared at her because I honestly did not know what she was talking about. I saw my grandson twice a year. I stopped dropping by unannounced after Vanessa complained about boundaries. I apologized constantly for things I did not even understand anymore. Somehow it was never enough. My father finally spoke in a tired voice that sounded older than I had ever heard before. Maybe everyone needs space for a while. Space. Such a harmless word. Like they were discussing furniture instead of slowly removing me from my own family. I remember looking at my mother, waiting for her to defend me the way she used to when kids at school made fun of my stutter in 7th grade. But she only stared down at her untouched potatoes. Daniel rubbed his forehead like he was exhausted by my existence. Vanessa stayed calm. She always stayed calm. That was what made her dangerous. By the end of the night, nobody officially said the words no contact. They did not need to. Daniel stopped answering my calls the next week. Vanessa blocked me on social media. My Christmas card came back unopened in January with my own handwriting staring at me from the envelope, like proof of something humiliating. And somewhere inside all that silence, I slowly started believing maybe I really was the problem. Until the letter arrived. The strangest part about being erased from your own family is how quickly the world adjusts to your absence. At first, I kept expecting someone to call and explain everything. I thought Daniel would cool down after a few weeks. I thought my mother would secretly reach out when nobody else was around. I even convinced myself Vanessa would eventually get tired of whatever invisible competition she believed we were in. None of that happened. Days turned into months so quietly that sometimes I would realize an entire week had passed without hearing another human voice outside the cashier at the grocery store asking whether I wanted paper or plastic bags. I moved out of the townhouse I had owned for 21 years 6 months after the funeral because I could not afford it anymore. The property taxes kept climbing, and working part-time at the bookstore barely covered groceries and utilities. I sold half my furniture before moving into a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the east side of Columbus. The first night there, I sat on folded blankets because my new sofa had not arrived yet, and listened to washing machines humming through the floorboards until 2 in the morning. Funny how humiliation loses its sharpness after enough repetitions. Eventually, it just becomes routine. Every morning, I walked 3 blocks to Miller's Books on Main Street, carrying coffee in a faded travel mug Daniel gave me 12 years earlier for Mother's Day. I should have thrown it away long ago. Instead, I kept using it because some stubborn part of me still remembered the little boy who once saved allowance money to buy it. At the bookstore, I shelved biographies, organized used mysteries, and helped elderly customers find large print novels. Most days were peaceful in a quiet, lonely sort of way. The owner, Frank Miller, never asked personal questions. I appreciated that. People always think loneliness needs to be fixed. Sometimes it just needs room to breathe. Holidays were the hardest. The first Thanksgiving after no contact, I bought a small turkey breast even though I knew I would barely eat half of it. I set the table for one beside the apartment window and watched families carrying pies into warm houses across the street. Around 7 o'clock that night, I checked my phone and saw pictures online from Daniel's dinner. Vanessa had posted them publicly. My grandson Tyler sat between my parents wearing matching plaid pajamas, while everyone smiled around a dining table I recognized immediately. My mother's dining room. My seat was gone. Not empty. Gone completely. Like I had never existed there at all. I remember staring at that photo for a long time because something about it unsettled me more than the silence ever had. My father looked uncomfortable. My mother's smile seemed strained around the eyes. Vanessa stood directly behind Daniel's chair with one hand resting lightly on his shoulder, like she was presenting something she owned. At the time, I told myself I was imagining things because grief makes people paranoid. But then other details started surfacing slowly over the following months. My parents changed banks unexpectedly. Daniel suddenly began handling more of their paperwork. Vanessa started accompanying my mother to medical appointments, even though they had barely tolerated each other years earlier. Once, completely by accident, I overheard Martin Hale arguing quietly with my father outside a pharmacy downtown. "This is exactly what Gloria was worried about," he said before noticing me across the parking lot. The moment he saw me, both men went silent. My father looked pale. Martin looked nervous. Neither of them approached me. 2 weeks later, my mother stopped answering my letters completely. And now, sitting alone at my kitchen table with her final handwritten note in my hands, I realized something that made my skin turn cold. Maybe my parents had not abandoned me willingly after all. For almost an hour, I sat motionless at my kitchen table staring at the brass key taped beside the document. It looked old, heavier than a normal house key, with tiny scratches near the handle like it had been used for years. My mother never attached meaning to objects carelessly. If she mailed me a key before she died, it mattered. Outside, the rain had slowed into a thin mist that blurred the apartment parking lot into soft gray shapes. Somewhere downstairs, dryers rumbled beneath the floorboards. The ordinary sounds of life continuing while mine quietly tilted sideways again. I finally unfolded the legal document Martin Hale included with the note. Most of it was written in dense legal language that made my eyes ache, but one phrase appeared over and over again. Storage Unit 214. Access granted solely to Evelyn Carter upon verification of identity in the event of Gloria Carter's passing. My pulse quickened immediately. I read the page 3 times before reaching for my coat, hanging beside the front door. The storage facility sat nearly 40 minutes outside Columbus near an old highway lined with gas stations, pawn shops, and faded motel signs missing half their letters. By the time I arrived, the sky had darkened into that dull blue-gray color October afternoons get right before sunset. The manager behind the desk looked barely 20 years old and smelled faintly like cigarette smoke and peppermint gum. He checked my identification twice before handing me a clipboard to sign. "Your mother prepaid the unit for 5 years, he said casually. Said nobody was allowed inside unless you came personally. Something cold moved through my chest at those words. Nobody was allowed inside unless I came personally. The storage buildings stretched behind the office in long, narrow rows of faded orange doors. Unit 214 sat near the very end beside a chain-link fence rattling softly in the wind. My hands trembled slightly as I slid the brass key into the lock. For a second, it stuck. Then the mechanism clicked open with a sound that echoed strangely in the quiet evening air. The overhead light flickered, weakly when I stepped inside. At first glance, the unit looked almost disappointingly ordinary. A wooden desk, several sealed cardboard boxes, 2 filing cabinets, my mother's blue floral armchair from the lake cabin they sold years ago. But then I noticed the labels written carefully across the boxes in black marker. Bank records, medical notes, letters never sent, Daniel and Vanessa. My stomach tightened instantly. I set my purse down slowly on the dusty concrete floor and opened the nearest filing cabinet. Inside sat dozens of neatly organized folders filled with printed emails, financial statements, handwritten notes, and copies of legal documents. My mother had documented everything. Every withdrawal from my parents' retirement accounts. Every property transfer Daniel handled. Every hospital visit Vanessa attended unexpectedly. There were even printed screenshots of text messages. Some between Daniel and my father. Some between Vanessa and someone saved only as consultant. The deeper I looked, the colder I felt. This was not paranoia. This was preparation. My mother had been building a record quietly for years. Then I found the notebook. A thick leather journal sitting alone inside the desk drawer beneath several sealed envelopes. I recognized it immediately because my mother carried similar notebooks everywhere after retirement. Grocery lists, garden notes, prayer requests, recipes. She wrote everything down. My fingers shook as I opened the first page. The entry was dated nearly 18 months before the funeral. Vanessa asked Richard today whether Evelyn's name could be removed from the trust entirely. She pretended it was only for tax purposes. Richard does not trust her intentions. Neither do I. I stopped breathing for a moment. Then I turned the page and kept reading. The deeper I went into my mother's journal, the more my entire understanding of the past 2 years began shifting beneath me. I sat in that cold storage unit until long after sunset, reading page after page while the weak fluorescent light buzzed overhead. My mother's handwriting remained neat, even when the entries became emotional. That alone unsettled me, because Gloria Carter did not frighten easily. She had survived breast cancer at 58, buried 2 siblings before 60, and once drove through an Ohio snowstorm with a broken windshield because my father needed emergency surgery. But inside those pages, I could feel her fear growing slowly month by month. Vanessa keeps insisting Evelyn is unstable, one entry read. She says Daniel feels emotionally manipulated every time Evelyn calls. None of it sounds like my daughter. Another entry stopped me completely. Richard believes Daniel is being pressured. Vanessa handles all his appointments now, all financial discussions, all communication. He barely speaks without looking at her first. I closed the notebook for a moment and stared at the concrete floor while cold air drifted through the storage hallway outside. Suddenly, memories I had spent 2 years trying to suppress came rushing back differently. Daniel canceling lunch plans at the last second because Vanessa was uncomfortable. Vanessa insisting family gatherings caused him stress. My parents becoming strangely formal around me near the end, as if someone had carefully convinced them every emotional reaction I had was proof of instability. It was not random distance. It was strategy. I kept reading. About halfway through the journal, I found an entry dated only 6 weeks before my mother died. The ink looked darker, pressed harder into the paper. Martin suggested creating a contingency clause after reviewing recent account requests. Richard finally agreed today. If Evelyn is isolated from the family under suspicious circumstances, the trust activates differently. I read the sentence 3 times. Then 4. My pulse thudded loudly in my ears. Contingency clause. Trust activates differently. Suddenly, the legal papers inside the filing cabinet mattered far more than I initially realized. I opened another folder labeled Estate Revision Final and spread the documents carefully across the desk. Most of the language was dense and technical, but one paragraph had been highlighted in yellow by my mother herself. In the event that Evelyn Carter experiences intentional familial isolation, coercive estrangement, or exclusion enacted. For purposes of financial influence, inheritance distribution shall be suspended and reassigned pending investigation by estate counsel. I actually laughed again, quietly this time, not because any of it was amusing, but because I finally understood why my mother wrote they failed. Vanessa thought isolating me would make me disappear cleanly from the inheritance structure. Instead, my parents built the entire estate around detecting exactly that behavior. They had seen it happening before I did. There were more records underneath. Printed bank transfers. Notes from meetings with Martin Hale. One envelope contained copies of emails Vanessa sent my father offering to simplify future inheritance complications by consolidating assets under Daniel's direct control. The wording was polite, professional even, but beneath every sentence sat the same ugly intention. Remove Evelyn quietly. Control everything afterward. My father scribbled one sentence across the top of the printout in red ink. Absolutely not. For the first time in 2 years, tears finally burned behind my eyes. Not because my family abandoned me, because my parents had been trying to protect me while pretending not to. That realization hurt far worse. I looked around the storage unit at all the boxes they left behind for me to find. Evidence, instructions, insurance against the possibility that they would die before fixing what was happening. My mother knew exactly how this would end. And somewhere out there, Daniel and Vanessa still believed they had won. I left the storage facility after 9 that night, carrying 2 boxes in the trunk of my aging Honda Civic and a feeling I could not fully describe. Not relief. Not anger either. It felt more like waking up after years of being told a story about yourself only to discover someone else wrote it for you. The highway back to Columbus stretched dark and nearly empty beneath cold autumn rain. I drove with the radio off, replaying fragments of my mother's journal over and over in my head. Vanessa handles all communication now. Daniel barely speaks without looking at her first. They feared her. That realization unsettled me more than the inheritance documents ever could, because once I stopped seeing Vanessa as simply difficult and started seeing her as strategic, every memory shifted shape. Even the small ones. Especially the small ones. Back when Daniel first married her, she played the role perfectly. Warm smile, volunteer work, homemade casseroles for neighbors. She called my parents Mom and Dad, within 3 months of the wedding. My mother used to say she admired Vanessa's confidence. Looking back now, I realize confidence was only the surface layer. What she truly possessed was patience. She never openly insulted me, never raised her voice, never gave anyone a clear reason to distrust her. Instead, she operated quietly inside conversations, redirecting them 1 inch at a time until people no longer noticed the shift. If Daniel forgot to call me on my birthday, Vanessa would later say they were overwhelmed. If I seemed hurt, suddenly I was too sensitive. If I questioned anything, she framed it as emotional pressure. She turned normal reactions into evidence against me so gradually that eventually even I started monitoring my own feelings around her. I remembered one Thanksgiving in particular nearly 4 years earlier. We were all gathered at my parents' lake cabin before they sold it. Snow covered the backyard in soft white drifts while football played quietly in the living room. At one point, Tyler accidentally spilled cranberry sauce across the dining table and burst into tears. I grabbed napkins automatically and told him it was fine. Children spill things. But before I could even stand up, Vanessa stepped between us, smiling tightly. "Let mommy handle it," she said. Not rude, not openly hostile. But the message was clear enough that even 7-year-old Tyler looked confused. Later that evening, I overheard her telling Daniel in the kitchen that I had a habit of undermining boundaries. Boundaries. That word again. She used therapy language the way some people use legal contracts. Carefully. Precisely. Impossible to argue against without sounding unstable yourself. By the time my parents grew older and needed help managing appointments and finances, Vanessa had already positioned herself as the reasonable one, the organized one, the calm voice inside every conflict. My mother documented all of it in painful detail. One journal entry described Vanessa insisting that stress from family tension was worsening my father's blood pressure. Another noted how Daniel stopped visiting alone entirely after his wife began attending every conversation. Then I found the sentence that finally made everything click. Vanessa told Richard privately that Evelyn may challenge the estate emotionally if she feels excluded. She suggested preparing safeguards against future disruption. Future disruption. I laughed out loud when I read that line sitting in my apartment near midnight. Not because it was funny, because suddenly I understood the brilliance of what my parents had done. Vanessa believed she was slowly removing me from the family structure before the inheritance process began. She thought isolation would weaken my position. Instead, every single step she took only activated the protections my parents secretly built against exactly that behavior. And somewhere out there, Daniel still had no idea the trap had already closed around both of them. 3 days after discovering the storage unit, my phone rang for the first time in nearly 8 months. I was standing on a step stool at Miller's Books reorganizing a shelf of hardcover biographies when the vibration startled me badly enough that I almost dropped a stack of books onto the floor. For a second, I simply stared at the screen because I genuinely did not recognize the number anymore. Daniel. My son's name sat there glowing softly beneath the fluorescent bookstore lights like something from another lifetime. Around me, the store remained quiet except for low jazz music drifting from the front counter and rain tapping gently against the windows again. Ohio seemed permanently gray that October. I let the phone ring 4 times before answering. Hello. Silence greeted me first, then breathing, uneven, nervous. Mom. Just hearing his voice after so long sent something strange through my chest. Not warmth exactly. More like opening an old wound and realizing it had scarred over without you noticing. Daniel, I said, calmly. This is unexpected. He exhaled shakily. I have been trying to reach you since yesterday. I almost laughed at that because he had not tried reaching me once in 2 years until now. I work during the day, I replied, sliding another biography carefully onto the shelf. Most people start with a text message. More silence followed. In the background, I could hear muffled movement and what sounded like cabinet doors opening and closing quickly. Vanessa's voice drifted faintly somewhere behind him, sharp and tense. Daniel lowered his voice immediately after. Mom, did Martin Hale contact you recently? There it was. Not an apology, not concern, not even basic conversation. Straight to the real reason for the call. I stepped down slowly from the stool and carried the books toward the counter while considering how to answer. Why would you ask that? Another pause. Longer this time. There have been some complications with Grandpa's estate. Complications. Such a careful word. I remembered my mother using similar language whenever she wanted to discuss something painful without fully naming it. Daniel sounded exhausted in a way I had never heard before. Beneath the tension in his voice sat genuine fear. The accounts were frozen temporarily, he continued. Martin says there are legal reviews happening now. I leaned lightly against the counter while Frank pretended not to overhear from the register. That sounds stressful, I said quietly. Daniel exhaled hard. Mom, please do not do this right now. The sentence stunned me because for 2 years I blamed myself for every fractured relationship in our family. Yet hearing him now, I suddenly realized something important. Daniel still believed I was reacting emotionally. He still thought this was a conflict that could be managed if everyone stayed calm enough. He had absolutely no idea how much I already knew. Vanessa says you have been meeting with Martin privately, he said carefully. She thinks maybe somebody is misunderstanding things. Of course she did. Even now, the assumption remained that confusion originated with me. I closed my eyes briefly and pictured the storage unit filled with journals, records, highlighted clauses, and years of quiet preparation. Daniel, I asked softly, did you know Grandpa added a contingency clause to the trust? Complete silence. Not defensive silence. Shocked silence. Then movement in the background again. Vanessa speaking louder now, asking what I said. Daniel ignored her. What clause? He whispered. My stomach tightened unexpectedly because in that moment, I finally understood something my parents probably realized years earlier. Daniel was weak. Manipulated, yes. Complicit too, but not fully aware of the machinery operating around him. Vanessa had managed everything so thoroughly that even now he still sounded like a man waking up inside a collapsing building. You should ask Martin, I said gently. I think your grandfather wanted him to explain it personally. Before he could answer, another voice suddenly cut sharply through the phone. Vanessa, do not listen to her, Daniel. Her tone remained controlled, but I heard panic underneath it for the very first time. And suddenly, after 2 years of silence, I knew exactly who was finally afraid. The meeting took place the following Monday inside Martin Hale's downtown office overlooking the Scioto River. I had not been inside that building since my father updated his estate after surviving his second stroke nearly 5 years earlier. Back then, my mother joked that Martin's office smelled like expensive paper and sadness. Walking through those same glass doors now felt strangely unreal, like stepping into a memory someone else abandoned halfway through. The receptionist recognized me immediately despite the passing years. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly when she saw me standing there in my gray wool coat carrying my old leather purse. Not pity exactly, more like relief. Mr. Hale is expecting you, she said softly. The conference room sat at the end of a quiet hallway lined with framed legal certificates and family photographs. When I entered, Daniel was already seated at the far side of the polished mahogany table. He looked older than 60 days earlier, pale beneath the fluorescent lights with dark circles under his eyes. Vanessa sat beside him, perfectly composed in a cream-colored blazer, though I noticed her fingernails tapping rapidly against the tabletop. She stopped immediately when she saw me. Nobody spoke at first. I removed my coat carefully and sat near the opposite end of the table while rain streaked silently across the tall windows behind us. Martin Hale entered a moment later carrying a thick black folder. He looked tired too. Thank you all for coming, he said quietly before sitting down. Vanessa forced a polite smile almost instantly. Martin, surely we can resolve this misunderstanding today. There it was again. Misunderstanding. As if 2 years of calculated isolation were merely an unfortunate communication issue. Martin did not return her smile. Instead, he opened the folder slowly and removed several documents I already recognized from the storage unit. Daniel noticed immediately. Mom, he said hoarsely, you already saw those? I met his eyes calmly for the first time in nearly 2 years. Grandma wanted me to. Vanessa straightened slightly beside him. With respect, Gloria was under enormous stress near the end of her life. I think everyone knows emotions became complicated. Martin finally interrupted her. Mrs. Carter, your mother-in-law was very clear-minded until the day she passed. Silence settled heavily across the room after that. Then Martin pressed a button on a small digital recorder sitting beside the folder. Static crackled briefly before my mother's voice filled the conference room. Hearing it again nearly stopped my heart. Older. Weaker. but unmistakably hers. If Evelyn is hearing this, she said slowly, then Richard and I were right. Daniel froze beside Vanessa. Even Martin lowered his eyes respectfully. My mother continued, speaking with careful pauses between sentences. Families do not isolate people they love unless someone benefits from the silence. If my daughter has been removed from this family under the excuse of emotional instability, then I already know who caused it. Vanessa's face changed instantly. Not dramatic, just small cracks appearing beneath years of perfect composure. This is inappropriate, she said sharply. Gloria was confused near the end. Martin slid several medical evaluations across the table without speaking. Vanessa glanced at them briefly and went silent. My mother's recorded voice continued calmly through the room. Richard and I amended the trust after repeated attempts were made to pressure us into reducing Evelyn's inheritance rights. If those attempts succeeded through estrangement or coercion, all distributions would be frozen pending legal review. Daniel turned slowly toward his wife then. Truly looked at her for the first time all afternoon. I watched realization spread across his face piece by piece like a man waking from anesthesia. Vanessa finally lost control. This is insane, she snapped suddenly. After everything we did for your parents? The moment the words left her mouth, the room fell completely silent. Because there it was at last. Not love, not concern, not family. Everything we did for your parents. I leaned back quietly in my chair, and before I could stop myself, I started laughing. I could not stop laughing once it started. Not loud or hysterical. It was the kind of laughter that comes after carrying something heavy for so long your body no longer knows what to do when the weight suddenly disappears. For 2 years I believed I had lost my family because I was difficult, too emotional, too needy, too exhausting to love. I spent nights replaying conversations in my head wondering which sentence finally pushed everyone away. And now, sitting inside Martin Hale's conference room, while rain slid quietly down the windows behind us, I realized my parents had seen the truth long before I did. Vanessa stared at me like she genuinely did not understand why I was laughing. Maybe that was the most astonishing part of all. Even now, she still believed she had been the reasonable one in the room. Daniel looked sick, truly sick. His hands trembled slightly against the edge of the table, while Martin organized documents into neat stacks with the calm efficiency of a man who had spent decades watching families destroy themselves over money. Daniel, I said finally after my laughter faded, did you really think Grandma stopped speaking to me because she suddenly stopped loving me? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence answered for him. Vanessa leaned forward quickly before he could speak. Evelyn, nobody wanted this situation to become hostile. Hostile. Another careful word. Always careful. Always polished. I looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time in years, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger. No humiliation. No desperate need for understanding. Just clarity. You spent 2 years convincing people I was unstable, I said quietly. Meanwhile, my parents were documenting every move you made. Her expression hardened slightly then. Tiny cracks finally visible beneath the performance. Your parents were elderly, she replied carefully. They were vulnerable to emotional influence. Martin slid another folder across the table without a word. Inside sat signed medical evaluations from 3 independent physicians confirming both my parents remained mentally competent during every estate revision. Vanessa stopped speaking immediately. Daniel lowered his head into his hands. I watched him carefully, searching for the little boy who once cried after accidentally stepping on a bird in our backyard because he could not bear causing pain to anything smaller than himself. Somewhere along the way, that softness disappeared beneath years of passivity and convenience. He allowed someone else to decide who deserved love and who did not because conflict made him uncomfortable. That realization hurt more than the inheritance ever could. Martin cleared his throat gently. Under the terms of the revised trust, all distributions remain suspended pending final review. However, the contingency clause strongly favors Mrs. Carter's standing moving forward. Vanessa's face lost color completely. This is unbelievable, she whispered. But my mother warned me about that too. One final journal entry stayed folded inside my purse the entire meeting. I took it out carefully before standing to leave. The paper felt fragile between my fingers. If Vanessa ever acts shocked by consequences, my mother had written, it means she never expected anyone to notice what she was doing. I placed the note quietly on the table in front of Daniel. Then I picked up my coat and walked toward the door. "Mom," he said suddenly behind me, his voice breaking for the first time all afternoon. I stopped but did not turn around. "I did not know," he whispered. I believed him. That was the tragedy. He did not know because he stopped asking questions long before the damage was done. Outside the building, cold October air rushed against my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk beside the river. The rain had finally stopped. Across the water, the city lights shimmered softly against the darkening sky, while traffic hummed somewhere in the distance. My phone buzzed once inside my purse before falling silent again. I did not check it. For 2 years, they wanted silence from me. In the end, silence was exactly what I decided to give them. A lonely elderly mother receives a mysterious document from her parents' lawyer after 2 years of painful silence from her own family, and what she discovers changes everything she thought she knew about betrayal, inheritance, and loyalty. This emotional drama follows a quiet widow as she uncovers hidden records, secret trust clauses, and shocking proof that her manipulative daughter-in-law carefully pushed her out of the family for financial gain, while her weak son stood by in silence. As old wounds reopen and long-buried truths come to light, the elderly mother slowly realizes her parents saw the betrayal long before she did and secretly prepared a final plan to protect her. Filled with emotional twists, realistic tension, and powerful moments of silent revenge, this story is perfect for viewers who love family stories about inheritance conflict, toxic relatives, emotional manipulation, estrangement, and unexpected justice. If you enjoy deep, emotional family stories with strong, older female protagonists, heartbreaking family betrayal, hidden legal secrets, and satisfying emotional payback, this unforgettable drama will keep you hooked until the very end. These family stories explore loneliness, grief, greed, trust, and the painful reality of being erased by the people you love most. With cinematic storytelling, realistic American family dynamics, and a chilling emotional payoff, this is one of those family stories that stays with you long after the final scene. Fans of emotional family stories about mothers, sons, inheritance battles, and manipulative daughters-in-law will recognize the quiet pain and powerful truth hidden inside every moment of this story. Character 1. A 67-year-old white American woman with silver shoulder-length hair and tired blue eyes, wearing a simple gray wool coat and modest blouse. Front-facing portrait. Realistic lighting. Emotional expression. No cartoon. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration. Character 2. A 38-year-old white American woman with long blonde hair, sharp cheekbones, and controlled, confident eyes, wearing an elegant cream blazer and subtle jewelry. Front-facing portrait. Realistic lighting. Manipulative expression. No cartoon. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration. 1. A highly dramatic cinematic confrontation inside a luxurious downtown lawyer office during a cold, rainy autumn afternoon. A 67-year-old white American woman with silver shoulder-length hair stands firmly beside a polished mahogany conference table, holding inheritance documents close to her chest. Her tired blue eyes show pained strength and emotional clarity. Across from her stands a 38-year-old white American blonde woman wearing an elegant cream blazer and subtle jewelry. The younger woman has a controlled, manipulative expression with tension visible beneath her calm appearance. A pale, middle-aged man sits between them, looking emotionally shattered, while rain streaks down tall glass windows behind the group. Dark city skyline outside. Moody cinematic lighting. Realistic emotional tension. Natural skin texture. Sharp facial expressions. Sophisticated American legal office atmosphere. No poster style. No fantasy. No violence. No CGI. No illustration. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. Realistic cinematic realism. 122. A quiet, emotionally powerful everyday life seen inside a small apartment above a laundromat in Ohio during early morning rain. A lonely 67-year-old white American woman with silver hair and soft, tired blue eyes stands near a fogged kitchen window, holding an old, faded travel coffee mug with both hands. She wears a simple gray wool cardigan over a modest blouse and comfortable dark pants. The tiny apartment kitchen has old wooden cabinets, dim yellow lighting, secondhand furniture, and stacked books nearby. Rain falls softly outside the apartment window while blurred city lights reflect across wet pavement below. The woman looks emotionally exhausted but dignified with deep realism in her expression. Background includes a worn bookshelf and folded laundry basket near the wall. Cinematic natural lighting. Realistic American middle-class apartment atmosphere. Emotional isolation and quiet resilience. No fantasy. No glamour. No exaggerated posing. No CGI. No illustration. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. Emotionally realistic cinematic photography. 1-3. A luxurious modern suburban kitchen during bright morning sunlight, featuring a 38-year-old white American blonde woman with sharp cheekbones, calm, calculating eyes, and flawless appearance. She stands beside a large marble kitchen island while reviewing legal documents and financial papers near an expensive coffee machine. She wears an elegant cream-colored blazer, fitted slacks, subtle jewelry, and soft makeup with perfectly styled long blonde hair. Behind her, the kitchen features oversized windows, modern cabinets, polished stone counters, fresh flowers, and upscale American suburban interior design. Her expression appears calm, confident, and emotionally manipulative beneath the polished surface. The atmosphere feels emotionally cold despite the beautiful environment. Soft sunlight enters through large windows, creating realistic cinematic contrast across her face. Psychological tension hidden beneath normal daily routine. No villain caricature. Realistic family drama atmosphere. No fantasy. No violence. No CGI. No illustration. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. High realism, cinematic, emotional storytelling. 2-4. A powerful emotional family confrontation inside a dimly lit conference room during a tense inheritance meeting. The elderly white American mother sits calmly at one side of a polished table wearing a gray wool coat and holding an old handwritten journal while her silver hair frames a deeply emotional but controlled expression. Across from her, the younger blonde white American daughter-in-law begins losing emotional control with visible panic hidden beneath her elegant appearance and cream blazer. Beside her sits a pale middle-aged man staring downward in shock, while an older male lawyer stands nearby with organized legal folders, audio recorder, and inheritance documents spread across the table. Tall windows behind them reveal heavy rain and dark city buildings outside. The room feels emotionally suffocating and cinematic with realistic American legal office details polished with cold lighting and subtle reflections. No screaming. No violence. Emotional realism only. No fantasy. No CGI. No illustration. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. Cinematic family drama realism with psychological tension. 1-2-5. A deeply emotional discovery scene inside a dark storage unit filled with dusty cardboard boxes, old legal files, family photographs, handwritten journals, and forgotten personal belongings. A 67-year-old white American woman with silver shoulder-length hair kneels alone beside an open leather notebook under flickering fluorescent ceiling lights. Her tired blue eyes show shock, grief, and growing realization while she carefully turns fragile handwritten pages. The storage unit contains filing cabinets, old furniture, sealed envelopes, and scattered inheritance records, creating a realistic atmosphere of hidden family secrets. Dust floats softly through the cold air while shadows stretch across the concrete floor. The woman wears a modest gray coat, dark jeans, and practical shoes suitable for cold Ohio weather. The mood is cinematic, intimate, and emotionally heavy without becoming exaggerated. Realistic textures, emotional storytelling, and quiet suspense dominate the composition. No supernatural elements. No fantasy. No violence. No CGI. No illustration. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. Realistic cinematic emotional photography. 1-6. A peaceful cinematic ending beside a quiet American lakeside town during late autumn sunset. A dignified 67-year-old white American woman with silver hair walks slowly along a wooden dock, wearing a long gray wool coat, dark scarf, and simple boots while soft golden sunset light reflects across calm water. Her expression shows emotional peace, bittersweet freedom, and quiet closure after years of betrayal and loneliness. In the distance, small lakeside houses glow warmly beneath fading orange skies while autumn trees surround the shoreline, with deep red and gold leaves. The atmosphere feels calm, reflective, and emotionally mature. One hand rests inside her coat pocket where an unanswered phone remains hidden. Gentle wind moves her hair slightly while ripples spread across the lake. Realistic cinematic framing. Natural emotional storytelling. No fantasy. No violence. No glamour posing. No CGI. No illustration. No cartoon. No cartoon. No cartoon. Emotionally realistic cinematic final scene with soft American autumn atmosphere. 1.